So it's face to face. But the lectures, so I can also use material, will be online. Honored guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we shall begin the program in a few minutes. May we invite everybody to please take their seats and settle down. Thank you very much. Just a minute more. Thank you. Sorry, I just asked you to sit down, but anyway, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to everyone. To start our program, I will now request everybody to please rise for the Philippine National Anthem. Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Please take your seats. A pleasant morning to all our guests, ambassadors and members of the Diplomatic Corps, partners from the United Nations agencies in the Philippines, colleagues in the Philippine government, members of the academe and other partners, as well as students and youth representatives from various universities and organizations. On behalf of the Office of United Nations and international organizations of the Department of Foreign Affairs, I know it's a long title, I am pleased to welcome all of you to the celebration of the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. I am Ambrosio Brian Enciso III. I am Deputy ASEC for UNEO, and will be your host for today, all the way until lunchtime. And our event this morning is entitled UN Day 2025, a celebration of 80 years of hope and endeavor. This is being organized by the Department of Foreign Affairs in partnership with United Nations Philippines. This year holds a special significance as it marks the, of course, 80th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. We are celebrating both, of course, the UN's founding anniversary, as well as 8 decades of the Philippines' membership in the organization. Opening this event is one of our most senior and most respected diplomats. She has served as Consul General to Los Angeles, and she currently serves, and was also ambassador to Australia and Myanmar. She is currently the DFA's Undersecretary for Policy and the Director General of the for operations of the National Organizing Committee for the Philippines hosting of ASEAN next year. Ladies and gentlemen, may I call upon the Honorable Undersecretary Maria Helen B. de la Vega.
Thank you, Umbo, for that generous introduction. United Nations Resident Coordinator, His Excellency Arnold Peral, Ambassadors, Your Excellencies, and members of the Diplomatic Corps, honored guests, a pleasant morning to all. I wish to welcome all of you to the UN Day 2025, a celebration of hope and endeavor organized by the Department of Foreign Affairs in partnership with the United Nations in the Philippines. Our event today is part of a series of events for the 80th anniversary of the United Nations and an advanced commemoration of the UN Day, which is celebrated every 24th of October. May I also acknowledge at this juncture all our former ambassadors who have been with us through this journey in the UN, especially one of our most beloved multilateralist, Ambassador Libran Cabactulan, whom I met just, where is he? Thank you to our mentors in the United Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to offer some reflections on the UN's 80th anniversary. 80 years ago, from April to June 1945, representatives of 50 countries gathered in San Francisco to light a spark of hope after going through a time of great strife. Together, these pioneers forged a covenant of peace and prosperity for all nations and peoples, the UN Charter. The UN Charter is the distillation of the dreams and aspirations of a world weary from the ravages of war and determined to build a true community of nations. This document is the indelible record of the collective voice of, I quote, "We, the peoples of the United Nations," close quote, as written in the preamble, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. The UN Charter laid down the core principles that until now are sacrosanct: fundamental human rights, dignity and worth of the human person, international law, and better standards of life in larger freedom. That same year, in October 24, the 50 countries that signed the UN Charter, along with Poland, which did so at a later date, became the first and founding members of the United Nations. The Philippines was among these 51 pioneers, and only one of 3 in Asia. Today, we honor the determination of those who came before us, who bravely serve as the world's moral compass during a dark and uncertain chapter in humanity's history. For us Filipinos, we remember our former leaders who helped erect the foundations of multilateralism. Led by General Carlos P. Romulo, who eventually became the 4th President of the UN General Assembly, our delegation to San Francisco stood tall amongst the most brilliant minds of that time. To this day, we continue to aspire to follow the trail that they have blazed. Their work gave us a legacy to uphold, to continue to hope, and to endeavor. For the past 80 years, the Philippines has been carrying on this tradition of multilateralism in the United Nations and beyond. We have stood behind the cause of developing countries, championed climate action and human rights, advocated for disarmament and non-proliferation, and fought for the maintenance of international rules-based order. We have been a voice for women and children, migrants, indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities, and other groups in vulnerable situations. We have called for reforms of the UN development system, the Security Council, and the international financial architecture. We have been a supporter and donor to many UN agencies, international organizations, and humanitarian funds. What I can confidently say about the Philippines is that we are not content to be passive actors in global spaces, consistent with our Philippine brand of multilateralism. It is the same brand as a partner, pathfinder, and peacemaker that we will bring with us to the Security Council should we have the honor of being a non-permanent member for the term 2027 to 2028. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this reflection and expression of commitment is the same message that Secretary of Foreign Affairs Maria Teresa P. Lazaro delivered at the recent General Debate of the High-Level Week of the 80th UN General Assembly, when she reaffirmed the Philippines' resolve to continue to extend our steady hands in New York, Geneva, Vienna, Bangkok, Nairobi, Rome, and the cradles of joint action as a partner, pathfinder, and peacemaker. We are proud to have been active in these spaces and beyond. Here at home, we are transforming Manila into a regional hub and a meeting point where global conversations converge and thrive. In the past 2 years, we have brought to the region numerous international conferences on disaster risk reduction, women, peace and security, middle-income countries, health, rights of seafarers, IHL, among others. We offered Manila to be the home of international bodies, including the board of the fund responding to loss and damage. These initiatives are examples of how the Philippines is expanding its engagements at the national and global stage, part of our commitment to the spirit of open dialogue and multilateralism. And we still have a full calendar as we close the year. Thank you to our diligent and hardworking Assistant Secretary for United Nations, Assistant Secretary Isa Almuela. In the third week of November, we will be hosting the IAEA International High-Level Forum on Nuclear Technology for Controlling Plastic Pollution, or the NUTEC, or NUTEC. In that same week, we will also be hosting the first ever ASEAN Regional Forum workshop on peace and security in outer space. Co-chaired with Australia and Singapore, we will be infusing our region's views and experiences into this important global conversation. It is a prelude to our year-long chairship of ASEAN, which we would be assuming in 2026. By doing our part here and abroad, and by bringing critical conversations to the Philippines, we are sending the message that middle-income and developing countries are ready to be co-architects of global solutions. We're also leveling up our collaboration with the UN Philippines, which has been our close partner in bridging reforms at the global and national levels. We are encouraged to see that the initiative that we started with the 2024 to 2028 UN Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework is starting to expand into a broader vision of true development cooperation. This comes at the right time when financing difficulties and other challenges demand us to be more efficient, transparent, and intentional. The recent initiative of DepDev, launched during the Philippine Development Forum on 6 October 2025, is a step towards this direction, furthering our vision for development cooperation with bilateral and multilateral partners that are focused on impact, scale, and synergy. The UN in the Philippines has also been a good partner in disaster risk reduction, a key area of collaboration as we bear the brunt of extreme weather conditions brought about by climate change. Last Monday, October 13, the Philippines joined in marking the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, which spotlighted the urgent need to address the escalating costs of disasters. Reducing risks and building resilience goes hand in hand with rapid response. As a strong supporter and advisory board member of the Central Emergency Response Fund, we urge you to upscale your support during the fund's 20th anniversary this year. This is especially critical as disasters and emergencies increase in frequency and scale. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, during today's commemorative event, we have with us esteemed representatives from the government and the UN agencies, the diplomatic corps, private sector, CSOs, and the academe. We are making sure that we are promoting inclusion as we aim to implement national and global goals such as the SDGs. I also wish to make special mention of the over 30 youth and student representatives from several universities and organizations who are also joining us today. So, if you are listening closely, please raise your hands when I call your institution. It's like the principal asking the students. Philippine Women's University, thank you. De La Salle Model United Nations Community, School of Diplomacy and Governance, De La Salle College of St. Benilde, Ateneo de Manila, Bedan International Studies Association, San Beda College, Alabang, and the Lyceum of the Philippines, University in Manila. I am excited to have our youth representatives with us here today. We will pass the torch to you as the caretakers and stewards of diplomacy, global governance, and multilateralism. Friends, in remembering the Philippines' legacies as a founding member of the UN, let us cast our gaze ahead towards a future where Filipinos continue to help reimagine and rebuild a brand of multilateralism fit for a changing world. After 80 years, we owe it to the people of the world to reshape the UN into an international organization with a clear value proposition that is responsive to the needs of today's world and which can respond to contemporary challenges. As Secretary Lazaro has aptly said, the measure of credibility for the UN is whether it can hold its sovereign promise in today's world, where nations shape the future on equal terms. I urge all of you to take this opportunity to pull our heads together and gather the passion, tenacity, and wisdom to face up to this challenge. Today's commemoration is but another small contribution, a modest contribution of the Philippines to this noble enterprise. I wish everyone a productive, memorable, and enjoyable day ahead. Thank you, and mabuhay po tayong lahat.
Thank you very much, Undersecretary De La Vega. You have honored us immensely with your presence this morning. Our next speaker was former UN Resident Coordinator to Tunisia and Ecuador. He has a long career with the United Nations, serving in various capacities in Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, New York, and Cuba. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the current United Nations Resident Coordinator in the Philippines, Mr. Arnaud Peral.
Good morning, mabuhay. That's such a nice introduction. Thank you so much for the generosity. Good morning to all of you. It's really an honor, a pleasure. It's humbling to be here to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. Honorable Marilena B. de la Vega, Undersecretary for Policy of the Department of Foreign Affairs, thank you so much for your words, for your inspiring words about this celebration. Assistant Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs, Maria Teresa Armajuela, thank you so much for all your support, as always, and all the Department of Foreign Affairs. Good morning to all my colleagues from the Diplomatic Corps, also for my colleagues of the UN system, to the youth who are with us this morning, and all of you. 80 years of the United Nations, 80 years celebrating in the Philippines. It means a lot because the Philippines is really the country that illustrates what multilateralism and commitment to multilateralism means. As a founding members, for 80 years, the Philippines have been contributing and supporting the work in the United Nations. The list is very long of those contributions. And you continue today as illuminating the world, not only by your contributions to multilateral agreements, to support to a new vision for the future, by integrating global commitment in national policies, aligning the National Development Plan with the Sustainable Development Goal, and so on and so forth. But you also innovate in your public policies, and this is also so important for the United Nations, because you bring examples that we can also replicate and use and learn from for other contexts. You mentioned, Undersecretary, the leadership of the Philippines in disaster risk reduction, for instance. And I want to celebrate the recent signature by the President of a new bill that is widely called as the Anticipatory Action Bill, but that will allow the country to declare national emergency, a disaster emergency, even up to 72 hours before a disaster. This is unique. I mean, this is the first country in the world to adopt such a policy. And it will help unlock resources by LGOs, by the government, and it will help save lives, help be a lot more efficient. And in so many fronts, the Philippines have been innovating and bringing this knowledge to the world and sharing it to the world. So I think this is really the spirit of multilateralism. You know, in this, reflecting on what to share with you briefly this morning, the United Nations it's like an iceberg, right? You just see the tip of the iceberg, but there's so much more behind. And these exchange of experiences through soft cooperation, through different mechanisms that are being put in place in the UN, it's not just a talk shop. It's really a mechanism of exchange of knowledge, of our successes and our failures. And I think it's extremely important as it is. And there are parts of the work of the United Nations that are not always that visible. In the Philippines, you mentioned that we have this cooperation framework and we are aligned with the National Development Plan. And I think this governance of our cooperation is very strong and very solid. And I thank you for that, because this alignment is fundamental to all go in the same direction, working to consolidate peace in Barm, to support the efforts in disaster risk reduction and management, and so on and so forth. But we are also helping to help shape the future legislations and public policies. Currently, the network of UN agencies in the country is supporting more than 80 pieces of legislations from different angles: health, education, disaster management, nutrition, peace, Barm legislations. There's so much happening where we are actually connected to what the country is trying to achieve. And we are helping by sharing experiences and helping by also bringing some technical expertise for this alignment with international standards. So thanks to the Philippines for being a true multilateralist. The UN is also a punching ball. And it's a punching ball for everything that doesn't work, for every failure, for every shortcoming, for every frustration about the state of the world. And that's fine. That's fine. We can be this punching ball because we need one, right? We need to channel the frustrations of the member states, of the publics, of the youth, of everybody that would like to see faster results to the conflicts, to wars, to poverty, to hunger, to some of the other problems that we wished to have eliminated 80 years ago, but are still here. And those frustrations has to be channeled. So it's fine if the United Nations could be a punching ball once in a while and assume it. And we don't respond, we don't push back, and we assume because it's an evolving. As the world is evolving, as the world is transforming itself, we need also to transform. So we need to reform ourselves, and the commitment of the member states to help the different stream of reforms is extremely, extremely important. So the worst case scenario is dropping the ball of having this global forum that we have, because the UN is hope. The UN is hope for billions of people who aspire to a better and safer life. It was true 80 years ago, it is still true today. So we have to consolidate and make it better, faster, and more efficient in delivering. Because the UN is the global forum that humanity needs to ease tensions, to converge in vision, in values, in principles, to agree to disagree without violence, and to find global solution to global problems. So again, thank you for the Philippines for being a champion of multilateralism and for hosting this beautiful event this morning. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peral. And once again, thank you for United Nations Philippines for partnering with us in this celebration. Today, our program, ladies and gentlemen, has two parts. This morning's session, which we're having now, will be followed by a diplomatic reception at around noon, and it will be keynoted by the Secretary of Foreign Affairs. So, moving on, continuing with this morning's session, we will begin with a lecture entitled Retracing the Philippines' Legacy in the United Nations. Our speaker and lecturer is a Filipino historian who is currently an assistant professor of history at the De La Salle University. He completed his bachelor's and master's degrees in history in 2005 and 2010, respectively. He holds a doctoral degree in anthropology from the University of the Philippines in Diliman. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome with a round of applause, Professor Michael Charlson Xiao Chua.
Undersecretary De La Vega, UN Resident Coordinator, Mr. Peral, members of the Diplomatic Corps, representatives of UN agencies and other people and organizations trying to do good in this world, friends from the Department of Foreign Affairs, and I would like to also commend the students who are here and to greet them. Thank you for being here. You're the future of our country. You're the future of peace in the world. Mabigat, mabigat. Ladies and gentlemen, 80 years ago, on October 24, 1945, the United Nations was born after a devastating world war, the second in the history of mankind. In looking back at this history today, we also ask the question, is the Philippines important to the United Nations? Because we always ask ourselves, are we, Filipinos, even important to the world? There was a famous story on the birth of the United Nations that I thought was apocryphal, fake news, until I actually read the primary source. And I will quote, Senator Warren Austin of the U.S. delegation was chairman of the committee designing the official seal. A proposed design was sent round to all heads of delegations while we were still in San Francisco. When I saw it, I promptly went to see Senator Austin to complain. The Philippines is not on the world map. But General, Senator Austin explained, your country is too small. We can't put every country on this seal. Don't you realize that if we tried to include the Philippines on a map of this scale, it would be nothing more than a dot? All right, I said, give us that dot. The man was General Carlos P. Romulo. Writing before he died in 1985 in the book, Romulo, a Third World Soldier at the UN. The Philippines, although just a dot on the map, had contributed much to its development. In fact, even before we gained full independence on July 4, 1946, Carlos P. Romulo became one of the 51 signers of the Charter of the United Nations in June of 1945 at the San Francisco Conference as a delegate of the Commonwealth of the Philippines. As he said, he was there at the birth. In 1949, he became the president of the United Nations General Assembly and was known, and some people mistake in the Philippines that he became a Secretary General. No, but he was president of that high position as the 1949 president of the General Assembly. And he became known as Mr. United Nations for his continuous work with the UN, which lasted 40 years. That's half of the history of the United Nations today. In tribute to General Romulo, I would like to show you this video from my former television segment in the government station.
Si Carlos P. Romulo ay maraming bagay para sa Pilipinas. Isang manunulat, mamamahayag, diplomatiko, bayani. Ito ay sa kabila ng kanyang pagiging little. Ang karagdagang detalye tungkol kay Romulo mula kay Xiao Chua sa Showtime, Ako ay Pilipino. Makasaysayang araw po, it's Showtime! Sa Miyerkules, January 16, 2013, pipiliin na ang Miss Tarlac City 2013 para sa pagdiriwang ng pista ng aming bayan sa January 20. Tutungo po ako doon upang maging isa sa mga hurado. Suportahan po natin ang piyesta, paanyaya ni Dong Bautista at Cloydy Manluta. Sa isa pang bayan sa lalawigan ng Tarlac, sa Kamiling, isinilang naman 115 years ago ngayong araw, January 14, 1898, ang isang little giant, si General Carlos P. Romulo. Si General Romulo ang maliit na mama na kasama ni General Douglas MacArthur sa makasaysayang larawan na ito ng kanilang pagbabalik sa Leyte noong 1944. Parang bulinggit lang, ngunit hindi man umabot sa tangkad na 5'4", siya ay isa sa pinakadakilang Pilipinong lingkod bayan na lumakad sa mukha ng daigdig. Nagsilbi siya sa 8 Pangulo ng Pilipinas mula kay Manuel Quezon hanggang kay Ferdinand Marcos. Imagine, liban sa Little Giant, marami pang ibang ikinabit na titulo kay Romulo, parang beauty queen o boksingero. Si Romulo ay isa sa mga pensyonado na nag-aral sa Estados Unidos. Nakilala sa galing niyang sumulat at manulumpati. Naging mamamahayag, propesor ng UP at tagapayo ni Quezon. Nagwagi ng Pulitzer Prize, ang unang hindi Amerikano na nanalo ng journalistic award na ito. Naging voice of freedom ng radyo mula sa Corregidor at nang hirangin ni Quezon na kalihim ng impormasyon. 2 taon niyang inikot ang Estados Unidos upang magsalita sa ngalan ng mga sundalong Pilipino-Amerikano sa Pilipinas. Remember freedom. Nakilala siya bilang Mr. Philippines. Sa sobrang kasikatan niya, naging kinatawan siya ng Pilipinas sa paggawa ng charter ng United Nations o UN at kasama sa mga unang lumagda sa pagtatatag nito kahit na hindi pa tayo independent nation noon. Noong 1949, nahalal si Romulo na Pangulo ng ika-4 na General Assembly ng UN. Kailangan liwanagin na isang sangay lamang ang General Assembly ng UN at hindi siya naging pinuno ng UN o Secretary General tulad ng napagkakamalian ng iba. Mataas na posisyon pa rin ang Pangulo ng General Assembly. Nakaupo siya sa 3 phone books. Makita ng madla sa kanyang unang talumpati bilang Pangulo. Tinawag siyang Mr. United Nations. Bago magretiro sa diplomatic service, naging embahador pa sa Washington, D.C. at kalihim ng ugnayan panlabas. Ngunit noong 1962, hindi pa rin pinayagan ni Pangulong Diosdado Macapagal na makapagretiro. Nahirang na Pangulo ng Universidad ng Pilipinas noong 1962. Matapos pa nito ay nahirang pa sa ilang pang pwesto sa gabinete. At sa kabila ng kanyang edad, ang balong si Romulo ay nakapangasawa pa muli ng isang magandang Amerikanang mamamahayag, si Beth Day Romulo. Tinawag tuloy siyang Karate Kid. Sumakabilang buhay siya noong December 15, 1985 sa edad na 87 at hinimlay sa libingan ng mga bayani sa Fort Bonifacio. Bakit ba ang galing niya? Minsan kanyang sinabi, I had to be outstanding to prove I was capable, not in spite of having been born a Filipino, but because I was a Filipino. Mr. Philippines, Mr. United Nations, Karate Kid, salamat sa pagsasabing, ako ay Pilipino, marangal. Ako po si Xiao Chua para sa telebisyon ng bayan. And that Showtime.
I would like to also show you another very short clip. Let's feel the pride of 1949 when the Philippines was president of the UN General Assembly. Let's play the video.
59 flags herald the opening of the 4th General Assembly of the United Nations. 2 top diplomats spot a colleague, and Secretary Acheson gives the Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Vyshinsky an official welcome. Francis Schumann, completing the Big Four foreign ministers, joins the general pre-session pleasantries at Flushing Meadow. The Russians get an unpleasant surprise, however, when Yugoslavia, led by Tito's #1 man, Edward Kardelja, deserts the Soviet bloc for the first time in the voting for president. The West's candidate, General Carlos Romulo of the Philippines, is overwhelmingly elected. Many East-West conflicts loom in a session which President Romulo takes over. But for both East and West, it's better to fight out differences here than on the battlefield.
The fight out differences here than in the battlefield. We are not a small country. We can describe ourselves as a medium-sized economy. And in many ways, it was appropriate that even before independence, we already have been a member of the United Nations because the UN, of course, facilitates two great things. One is diplomacy, among other things, of course, diplomacy, and number two is human rights. And even before the coming of the Spaniards, the Filipinos were already adept in trade, in diplomacy, and the evidence of this is, of course, the Laguna Copper Plate inscription from 900 AD. So we had diplomacy, we have trade, and some people suggest in this country that we do not have a concept of human rights, the individual human rights. We do not have a concept of that. Because as Asians, we have a greater good than individual human rights. And I tell them, that's... I'm sorry for the undiplomatic language. Sorry for the French. That's not true. We have a concept of human rights. We have a concept of diplomacy. We have a concept of trading, which is anchored on the Filipino core concept of kapwa, which has no English equivalent, no English word equivalent, but to explain it, it's kapwa means to see yourself in the other person. That's human rights. That's how we deal with other people. And we do kapwa culture for the kaginhawaan, well-being of people, kapayapaan, peace, and kabutiang loob, goodness. The good society. And when pakikipagkapwa is cut, then we go to war as peoples. And so, it is also appropriate that we were part of the United Nations even before independence, because the very first meeting, which is called the UN Declaration of 1942, we actually signed. Manuel Luis Quezon, who actually have a film showing in cinemas today. One of his legacy was he was there at the first meeting of leaders, United Nations, in Washington, D.C. in 1942. So, yes, let us be proud that we are actually part of the beginning of the United Nations. Although we are known to prioritize America in our foreign policy, when we created the Department of Foreign Affairs in 1946, headed by then Vice President Elpidio Quirino as concurrent secretary, he started from scratch and formulated the 4 pillars of Philippine diplomacy, which prioritizes 1, close cooperation with the United Nations, and only then, number 2, close relations with the United States, followed by 3, friendly relations with neighboring countries, and 4, devotion to world peace. Parang Miss Universe, ano? When Quirino himself became president, he demonstrated this in a number of ways. When the International Refugee Organization, IRO, the predecessor of the United Nations High Commissioner for the Refugees, or UNHCR, requested a safe refuge for what were called the White Russians, no country wanted to take them in since they were still reeling from the effects of the last World War. The Philippines, barely 3 years as an independent country, took them in. The White Russians, numbering 5,500, were pro-Tsarist Russians who fled the Communist Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 to Shanghai, China, only to find themselves being endangered by the establishment of the Communist People's Republic of China in 1949. They were housed in Tubabo Island, Giwan, Eastern Samar for 3 years, and when Quirino visited them, He had the fences taken down to make the people feel that they are not prisoners here, but they were free. Quirino's granddaughter, Ruby Quirino Gonzalez Meyer, noted what was written in the identification cards of the refugees, that they were identified as, quote, under the protection of the Republic of the Philippines. Just imagine, the Filipinos were taking care, the Republic, 3 years pa lang sa pagiging malaya, we are already taking care of the downtrodden. Kina May G. Kwan, G1's municipal administrator, I think she's now councilor, and historian, wrote in a journal article, quote, exuding the famed hospitality of the Filipino, the White Russians in Tubabao comprised the 5th of 9 waves of refugees assisted by the Philippines since the 1920s. This episode is also the country's first international humanitarian assistance as a new republic. Let's play the last video.
Makasaysayang araw po, it's showtime! Sa kasaysayan natin, may mga mahalagang hiyas na matagal na naitago at hindi natin nabigyan ng halaga. Ngunit, kung ating tutuklasin, magniningning ito bilang inspirasyon sa ating lahat. Si Elpidio Quirino ay parang isang diamante, pinatibay ng apoy, ngunit nagniningning bilang isang pangulo na isinabuhay ang diwa ng Pasko. Pagpapatawad sa mga nagkasala sa iyo at pagkalinga sa mga nangangailangan. Hindi lamang talino, may puso.
Resolution 82 on June 25, 1950, which called on its member states to condemn the occupation of South Korea by the North Koreans. Only 16 countries responded, which included the Philippines. President Quirino told the 2nd Battalion combat troops, end quote, you who are to go now will be the first to carry the flag of your own sovereign nation abroad in the war for freedom. Poor as we are, this country is making a great sacrifice in sending you there, but every peso invested in you is a sound investment for the perpetuation of our liberty and freedom. Unquote. During the Battle of Yultong, only the Philippine line was not breached by the North, and we became known as the Stonewall of the United Nations. In 1953, President Quirino, even sent his own son, Lieutenant Tommy Quirino, and his own son-in-law, fighter pilot Lieutenant Chito Gonzalez, to Korea. Today, South Koreans thank the Philippines for defending their democracy, which had brought them much development. I would like to give my sympathy to Mr. Perol because of what he said about the United Nations being a punching bag of the frustrations of the world. Some think that the United Nations is useless, for it had not prevented wars since they do not have police powers against sovereign states. But just remember a world before the United Nations, when every 20, 30 years, there's a conflict among nations that just come out before the United Nations. To the credit of the UN, we haven't had another global conflict since then. Because at least for 80 years, countries have this platform to talk their differences and cooperate to make the world a better place. At least, nag-uusap-usap tayo. Kailangan nag-uusap-usap lang. Kahit hindi nagkakasundo, walang problema. And so, we saw this during the global pandemic. The world effort is the suffering of peoples. You know, vaccine development is like 10 years. Usual vaccine development, we're able to do it in 1 year because of the cooperation of countries. The UN is helping us imagine the world, a future that is better. through the Sustainable Development Goals that in the De La Salle University we put in every syllabi of our university. And that is what we call bayanihan. We have a concept of bayanihan where we cooperate with each other. That's very Filipino. And each Filipino, because of this SDG, can feel that they're part of that effort, of that bayanihan, of the bayani. We have joined important UN missions for peacekeeping. We have spread the Kapwa culture around the world because of the UN. Through climate action, climate justice, like what Mr. Lavinia is doing, through conflicts, resolution, and for the care of cultural heritage, which is close to my heart because I am a historian. We try to ease the suffering of the world and we give kaginhawaan, relief, well-being to the world. We are not a small country. We are more than a dot. Itaas mo ang noo mo, Pilipino, may papel ka sa kapayapaan ng daigdig. Mabuhay ang United Nations. Mabuhay ang Pilipinas. Maraming salamat po. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Chua. We will be going to the forum part of the lecture. So may I request for the change of stage, please? Thank you. Professor Chua, please join me on stage. Thank you very much. So to begin the open discussion, ladies and gentlemen, we have two student reactors that we will call upon to react to the short lecture that was just given to us. So to start off, may I call on our first reactor who shall be reacting from the floor. May I call on Ms. Isabella Patricia Noble from the Lyceum of the Philippines. Ms. Noble, thank you.
Excuse me. Good morning. Professor Xiao Chua's lecture perfectly encapsulates how international organizations such as the United Nations provides a platform for states, regardless of their size, power, and wealth, to assert their voice and contribute to shaping international norms and discourses. Truly, the Philippines' legacy is the perfect example for this. From CPR or Carlos P. Romulo's significant contributions during the birth of the United Nations to present Philippine ambassadors taking the lead in UN committees, the Philippines continue to demonstrate its unwavering commitment to multilateralism. The Philippines, despite being represented as a dot in the UN emblem, really is not a small country. It is rich in culture, rich in potential, hope, and diplomacy. However, the UN does face nuances and complex challenges that prevent them from fully realizing its mission of maintaining international peace and security. Countries one by one have called the structural reforms in the general debate of the 80th session of the UN General Assembly, emphasizing that the world now is not what it was 80 years ago. The Philippines' role in the United Nations, in international relations, must simply not be part of history. What does legacy mean? Legacy is not just about looking back. Rather, it is what comes next. It must evolve and respond to the current challenges of today. A student of international relations myself, I now ask, moving forward with a legacy like ours, how can we use what we have? Our history, our voice, our pakikipagkapwa-tao, to rise in advocating for a better, more inclusive, and more effective United Nations. Our legacy in the UN is not about the past. It is about the present and our shared future. Looking into the bigger picture, Filipinos of the future need the United Nations. Similarly, Filipinos are also important to the United Nations. The Philippines must take this as an opportunity to be one with the international community in advocating for a better, more inclusive, and more effective UN. We are not just talking, as what Professor Xiao Chua has mentioned. We are talking. Let us all be part of this conversation. Thank you and mabuhay.
Thank you. Can I give a reaction? Or later? Okay. Sige, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was Ms. Patricia Noble from the Lyceum of the Philippines University. Now may I call on our second reactor, a fellow Blue Eagle from the Ateneo de Manila University, Mr. Mati Valencia. Sir, please.
Thank you, everyone. Good day. As we celebrate the United Nations today, we do not merely applaud the institution in itself, but what it has promoted and cultivated in the past 80 years. We are celebrating the triumph of people that, no matter how different, can come together in one space. And I find it deeply motivating and inspiring that I get to respond to it today. Yes, Professor Chua, the Philippines is important to the United Nations. It is comforting to know that the Philippine actions poses hope to us youth, especially Filipino youth. Why? Because to be honest, most of the time, we find ourselves demotivated. Or insofar, not as inspired as we used to be. But now I know that that shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be the case. Sir Chua, you gave us a new idol for the youth. You know, for our youth, for us youth, it's important for us to try and embody someone, to try and follow someone. But we know, as in so far, not blatantly following them, as our ability to discern comes from there. Nonetheless, this kind of history tracing back with the different dignitaries before us, that we know it exists, makes us youth inspired to continue, but may I be as blunt as to say, to even make it better. Now, I want to add to the discussion based on the 4 pillars made by our late President Quirino. May I suggest that the 4th pillar, devotion of peace, be our first pillar? Why? Because I think that devotion of peace should be our guiding light, our norm, and our value that will actually guide the other 3 pillars. First, in the United Nations. Second, to the United States, our ally. Third, to our neighboring countries in the ASEAN. Because close cooperation needs to be defined to an extent where we should cooperate in. And I think it should be the 4th pillar, devotion of peace. I also found it striking when Professor Chua reminded us of a critique often thrown at the United Nations, that they say it's useless because, well, it is a punching bag for us. But then Professor Chua said, it's not, because it has prevented wars. And to an extent, I would argue that that is a fair and enduring criticism. But as he also pointed out, to its credit, we have not seen another global conflict in that scale since 1945. Precisely because there exists a platform where nations can talk. However, I want to build on that idea in your argument, Sir Chua. Just as the UN has evolved over the last 80 years, our way of measuring its effectiveness should evolve also. Because in our security now, security encompasses so many different things, as evidenced by the 7 Sustainable Development Goals. To limit its worthy only to its ability to simplify wars is to flatten its story, and it's oversimplifying the ability of the United Nations as a whole. Because what we are really celebrating today is not just the absence of conflict, but the fact that multilateralism still works. And that we are here today is a great evidence of that. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak today. This has always been our place in the story of the United Nations. And if we keep that spirit alive, then no matter how small we may seem, we will always matter, even if we're just a dot on that map. But the challenge isn't convincing others that it matters, because everyone in this room today agrees to that as well. The challenge is with us, the youth, who will soon step out there and inherit the task of carrying this vision forward. Because if history brought us here, then it is my generation who will decide where the story goes next. And I promise you, we can definitely take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That has been Mati Valencia and again Patricia Noble from Lyceum and from Ateneo de Manila. Sir, a reaction to your reactors.
I have three reactions. Number one, the kids are all right. If with people like you, kasi we're already doing our work now. Of course, we will not be always strong, and we need people who would take over. And please, please, please consider joining our diplomatic corps, our diplomatic workers. And so that's the first. Number two, criticism well taken, Madam. Thank you very much. Yes, I do not want to flatter the achievement of the United Nations, because yes, that there are just so many. The UN is just so passing. There's UNESCO, which is of course my favorite, and so many other things. For the third one, I guess both of you are talking about the role of the ordinary people in this. Ito sasabihin ko, and I would like to talk in our language. Tayong mga Pilipino, mahilig sana pumili tayo ng mga leader. We should choose leaders that would respect the rules-based order of the world. Naiintindihan nyo? Kailangan naghahalal tayo ng mga tao na rumerespeto na may international law, na may mga treaties tayo na sinusunod dahil ito ay tama, not to bend them because of political convenience or personal interest, which we have seen many, many times in this country. Nasa sa inyo yun. Nasa sa atin yun. The conversation. We must have a conversation, and I hope the teachers will be with me, about the importance of the United Nations, about the importance of UNCLOS, about the importance of our human rights treaties, so that we are conscious, not just that our leaders should not just give us kaginhawaan, but should also give us kapayapaan in the world. So, yeah, that's my reaction.
Thank you very much. So, electing leaders, but also probably not just for the Philippines, because are the leaders of every country who represent. I hope that in the future there would be a more preference for leaders that have a more international view of dealing with the world's problems.
Okay, just a small, a little more addendum. The first reactor said that it's not about the past. Of course, it's about the future, because the present and the future. But I also would like to say that our thinking of the past affects what we do. And that's why it's important to always look back. And we can only know ourselves if we look back. We cannot face the world if we do not know ourselves. So the importance of the lessons of history is guiding us, that our North Star in many ways, in having more judicious decisions for the future. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We have time for a few more questions. Yes, but I do not see any hands, but I hope to see after my question. So a very quick question. As a historian who looks at the longer arc of history in the world, do you think that this current skepticism of multilateralism is something that is unique to our times and brought about by special circumstances of our times? Or is it something that has happened before? How do you think this will pan out? Will the skepticism last? Or are we seeing a better terms of engagement in the coming decades? What do you think?
Okay, my thinking about this is very simple. Tough times, like world wars, would produce people who would yearn for peace, freedom, and human rights. The people who are deprived of human rights will yearn for these kinds of things. And they will work for it, and they're going to free themselves, they will stop wars, and produce an era of peace. The problem is when this era of peace comes, there will be a generation that would be born out of peace, and so they think that peace is just something that you can throw away, right? And you can get it back again. And human rights, like people are saying, let's give up human rights because of national interest. Because we want to kill the criminals. Let's give up human rights. But this should not be the case. But the problem is there will be a time that is going to come, and then they're going to now look for strong men and tyrants to support so that they would have a stronger country, because thinking that tyranny will make them strong. And being unitary and not multicultural will make them strong. Right? And we see that now in many countries. And then they're going to suffer because of this, because as we all know, in history, tyrants make people suffer, eventually. And there will be then another generation who would again suffer, and it would be a cycle, and they were going to produce another era of peace. You know how we can cut this cycle? If we learn from history. The problem is, a lot of us do not learn from history. And so that is why it's very important to actually put, and I think I'm part of the curriculum consultants of the Department of Education. I know that we have placed in certain subjects the role of the United Nations, so that it would be in the educational system, it would be everywhere. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. We have time for more questions, so I see hands. Come on. Okay, there. Thank you.
Hello. So I would like to ask one quick question. So with the innumerable instances of democratic backsliding today and young people being at the forefront of various movements for change, how do you think can the UN further provide a platform for young people to take part in global conversations, particularly in shaping the post-2030 agenda?
Before you answer, we can collect a few questions so that we can give the professor time to react to multiple questions. Yeah. Any follow-up from that, from the body? If not, then let's address that, sir.
Okay, one more.
Okay, there.
Please.
Yes. Sir, that was a heartfelt message and speech po. As for my question, knowing that there's stigma around the UN, and we need to encourage youth to participate in diplomacy and to contribute to the global stage. Now, how can we do that when there's stigma, especially when most people are not that well versed in international relations?
Wow. Mag-YouTube. Wow.
Manood ng YouTube.
Another one. Sige. O last one.
One last, yeah, sure.
Sorry. Earlier, you were pointing out that in order for us to become better for the future, we have to learn from the past. Now, I want to ask, with the direction of where our country is headed and how the youth is behaving, would you say that we are moving to a more peaceful world, or do you think that we need to have another...
No.
Would you say that we are pushing forward with peace, with the direction of our country?
Okay. Thank you so much. These are fantastic questions. And sometimes, I have an imposter syndrome. I don't know why I'm here. I'm a professor of history and I'm not really well versed in international relations, but I would try to answer the questions. For the participation of the youth, there's actually model United Nations organizations that you can get involved with, like them. And going to fora like this, encouraging students, and I know that the Department of Foreign Affairs is doing their best to actually involve more students to be more inclusive, because yes, this is a diplomatic event, but this is also for all Filipinos, and that's why we have a YouTube live. That's why Filipinos, my relatives, my mother is actually watching me now. Ordinary people should be in this conversation. Tama itong ginagawa ng DFA. You are democratizing this, yung mga usapan na ito, and of course, this can be used by teachers around the country. So yun, to amplify the voice of the youth, it is very important. So now, there's a question about, and I think they're related, about the cynicism of the youth, how can they be encouraged? And number two, what do you call this? I forgot the other one.
I think the first question from the gentleman.
No, I already answered that. Stigma, yes, the stigma, and are we sliding back to yeah, that one. Are we sliding back to darker times? Okay, I tell you. I do not want to attack other countries, but this is what I'm going to tell you. You know, young people, and this is my message to the young people of today, do not be too hard on our country. Do not be too hard on our country. Yes, the ghost flood control projects and the corruption should inspire you that you yourself should get involved in government. Not necessarily to get elected, but to actually be in the forefront of non-governmental organizations, checking all of these things, being aware of the issues of the country. The results of the last elections actually proved that the young people, a lot of the young people, are actually waking up. And then, if you look at Congress, there's involvement of young people, new ideas, very progressive. Before, they're like fringe group in Congress, and now they're actually there at the forefront. Wow. So, yeah, so you don't be afraid. Don't think that all of government is corrupt. I'm going to tell you, my wife works at the Department of Education, a regular employee, hundreds of thousands of government employees, people here at the Department of Foreign Affairs. I know they're not corrupt. They go here every day to work, to make government work for the people. And so do not be afraid to engage with government. And my final point to answer all of this question is, so are we sliding back to darker times? We should always have hope. Like our heroes, like the diplomats today and in the past, that we can actually do something. I mean, you will not be here. I mean, yes, this is DFA, you go to government office, this is for livelihood, of course. But I believe that you are also in the DFA because you know that you can contribute something. And you have that every day, and you work every day. You work every day because you believe that there could be a bright future with the things that we are doing. Diba? You should always have that hope. Okay, my final point, ladies and gentlemen. If you look at other countries, hate crimes, political assassinations, religious hate crimes, they are made, and political crimes, they are made by ordinary people. The ones I call DIYs, do it yourself. They're like ordinary people hating on other people with a different religion, background. Well, have I ever heard of a BBM supporter or a DDS or a Dilao killing each other in the Philippines? I mean, we fight toxic wars in social media, yes. But when you are in front of each other, there's still that kapwa culture. Crimes here happen because either you have personal vendetta, sinaksak ka dahil may nakatraso ka, or they're made by state actors, rogue state actors, or political warlords. But not ordinary people. Not ordinary people. So in that sense, my hope in the Filipinos is not little. It's 100 million good Filipinos who are running this country. And it has been proven that you young people are in the forefront of this. So thank you very much for what you do. Continue with what you're doing. Buhatin nyo ang bayan natin. Maraming salamat.
Thank you very, very much. And on that note, I'm afraid we will have to end the lecture portion of our session this morning. We will move on to a panel session. But before we end, before we say goodbye to Professor Xiao Chua, let's show our appreciation by giving him another round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the next part of our program is a panel discussion entitled Charting the Philippines' Future as Co-Architect of Multilateralism. The moderator for our panel is a National Project Officer for Labor Mobility and Social Inclusion at the International Organization for Migration Philippines, or IOM Philippines, Migration Management Unit. She has led the implementation of projects on fair and ethical recruitment of migrant workers and enhancement and promotion of regular pathways for labor migration. She is a lawyer specializing in international law and human rights. May I invite on stage to be our panel moderator, Attorney Maureen Gadi de la Cruz. She will be joined on stage by the following panelists, which I will be inviting to take also their seats on stage. First is Professor Antonio Tony Lavinia, Mr. Mohammed Shahood, and DOST Undersecretary, the Honorable Leah Buendia. At this juncture, to speak more about the topic and also our speakers, I now turn over the floor to our panel moderator, Attorney Maureen Gadi de la Cruz. Ma'am?
Thank you very much, Ambo. Good morning again. I hope we were all energized and inspired by Professor Xiao's lecture. And I would dispense with the formalities because I'm sure we're all excited to hear from our esteemed panelists. I'm very honored to be sharing the stage with them today, who bring in a diversity of expertise on various fields which are relevant to this topic. So earlier this morning, we had a chance to look back on the legacy of the Philippines within the United Nations. And now we are asked to reflect and look forward on the Philippines as a co-architect of multilateralism. So let me first briefly give an introduction of each of the speakers, and then I will pose a question, an initial question to each of you to get the discussion rolling. We have with us on stage, of course, Professor Antonio Lavinia, who is a teacher, lawyer, human rights and climate justice advocate who has been teaching in various universities in the Philippines and is also currently Associate Director for Climate Policy and International Relations of the Manila Observatory. He has also just been appointed as a member of the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague for a term of 6 years. And in the last 3 decades, Professor Tony has served many times as lead negotiator for the Philippines in the implementation of conventions on biological diversity and climate change, including the Kyoto Protocol on climate change, the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety, and the Paris Agreement. So let's first give a big hand to Professor Tony Lavinia. And also joining us today is a colleague from the UN system, Mr. Mohammed Shahud, who is a development economist with a strong track record in the UN system and finance sector across the Asia-Pacific region. His expertise spans human development, inclusive growth, anticipatory governance, and development finance, including climate finance. So quite recently, in 2025, Mohammed was appointed as UNDP economist for the Philippines, where he now leads economic policy engagement with the government of the Philippines and other stakeholders in the country. Prior to this, he has held economist roles in UNDP country offices in Malaysia, the Maldives, and the Lao People's Democratic Republic, advising governments and regulators on mainstreaming human development concepts in policymaking and inclusive growth strategies. Friends, let's give a warm hand to Mr. Mohammed Shahud. And last but not the least, joining us on the panel is Dr. Leia J. Buendia, who is currently Undersecretary for Research and Development of the Department of Science and Technology, or DOST. Prior to being an Undersecretary, she was also the first and only Assistant Secretary for International Cooperation of the DOST from 2016 to 2022. USEC Buendia supports the leadership of the DOST in advancing science, technology, and innovation in the country and ensuring that the results from these innovations are maximized for the benefit, of course, of all the Filipino people. So in this role, she oversees management of the DOST's research and development programs through the Grants and Aid program, among others. Everyone, let's give a warm hand for USEC Leia Buendia from DOST. So, to start off the discussion, I'd like to pose a question first to Professor Lavinia. Climate justice, climate negotiations are among the hot topics in the UN system, in the international community right now. And with your vast experience in climate negotiations, how do you see the Philippines sustaining and strengthening its role as a leading moral voice in all of these discussions, particularly with the fact that we're now hosting the Loss and Damage Board? How do you see the way forward in the short to medium term for the Philippines' engagement in these platforms?
Thank you. I actually want to start with that story that Professor Shao shared about the dot in the map. I teach constitutional law in University of Philippines and other schools, and I also teach public international law. So we have to talk about national territory, United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the dispute with China, all of that. And when I show the map, that's the Western map, Western-made map, and of course there are just a few dots there. But the real map includes our oceans, our seas, and we're one of the biggest countries in the world when you do that. And the other real map that counts actually a lot for many issues, including for climate change, is population. And we are 12th, 13th, we're in the top 15 countries of the world in terms of population. So our role in the climate negotiations comes from these two strengths: territory, a very big territory, terrestrial and marine, and our people, making us very vulnerable to climate change, number one or number two, depending on the year at risk of climate change. Therefore, became very important for us early on in the climate process in 1990 that this became a priority for our environmental diplomacy and for many of our agencies. And the answer to your question, and since then the influence has been significant. I've had the pleasure of playing very different roles, from technical roles to political roles, to also being an outsider as an academic, technical expert, and an activist. And our contribution, I would say, has been in three areas. One is on the broad questions of what the agenda is. From the very beginning, we were one of the strongest advocates of emission reductions by developed countries for leadership by developed countries. So for example, in the Kyoto Protocol, we were very strong about that, and also finding ways for developed countries to be able to do that. When the agenda of adaptation finally entered negotiations in the early 2000s, the Philippines was one of the strongest to push that. And of course, loss and damage in the last 5 years, we have been a leader in that field. So the area of the broad agenda, the area of climate finance, I would dare to say that the Green Climate Fund was created in Cancun in 2010, largely because of the leadership of the Philippines in the G77, Group of 77 in China. In particular, for the DFA people, you would know her, at least the older ones, in particular because of Bernadita Smuller, who really fought almost almost a very lonely fight. Even within our delegation, early on, we were all skeptical about creating a new financial facility for climate change. Let's just do the World Bank, the ADB, the other multilateral development banks. But Bernadita took on that leadership in the delegation in the G7 in China. And finally, we got that in Cancun. And the same with the loss and damage financing mechanism, which we also fought very hard for, starting in Warsaw, until it finally got accepted in Warsaw was 2013. After Yolanda hit us, Typhoon Haiyan hit us, we fought very hard for a loss and damage mechanism. In the Paris Agreement, we got that into place. So that is a major contribution, and now we are now hosting the board of the loss and damage mechanism. And then the third area is actually in biodiversity and forests. Actually, that's the area that I focus on. I was chair several times of many of the forest negotiations in the climate process from the beginning. In fact, I saw Ambassador Feria earlier. Believe it or not, Ambassador Feria and I worked on her first assignment in Paris in the 1990s, when I think it was first or second assignment as a foreign service officer, and worked with a lot of DFA people in that field as well. So what's the future? What the future? The question you ask is what's next for us, right? And that question can be answered in terms of what's next for the climate process, given the political situation now. I think what's next for us is to make sure that the loss and damage facility gets the funding it deserves, and pushing that forward. But I think more strategically, especially because there's a certain stalemate, inertia now in the multilateral process on climate, and that might last for a while. The United States, the security situation in Europe. But there's an avenue that just opened, where the Philippines is also a major part of, and which is that of climate justice litigation. With the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, which was requested by the General Assembly, led by small island states, but also supported strongly by the Philippines. And the Philippines also appeared there. The ICJ opinion opens so many avenues. I am amazed at the breadth of the opinion and its direction, telling us where we could go next. We've always thought, and I'm a convention person, I negotiated a convention early on, negotiated many of its first decisions, starting from the first conference of the parties in Berlin. And we've always thought that, well, the response to climate change globally, internationally, always had to be in the convention process. But the ICJ actually says that the obligations of countries to climate change is not limited to its obligations in the convention, but it's now customary international law It has a lot of sources and not just the convention. So that's mind-blowing for those of us who are experts in this field because it gives us so many other options now to push climate justice. So I'm looking forward to that. The Philippines will excel in that field. Our top diplomats already have worked with several generations of diplomats. Here are now ambassadors, certainly chiefs of missions, and it's quite incredible the talent that we have at the diplomatic side, at the legal side, and also the civil society side and the technical side, the OST, the ENR, Climate Change Commission. So we're ready for that next phase, which is combat. It has to be combat because it's such a big problem, and if you allow the multilateral process to determine that, because as you know, multilateral process requires consensus, right? And if there's no consensus, that means you cannot move forward. But the way to push the consensus is through another way, through legal combat in different forums that might be able then to move the process. We'll see that in Belém, because in Belém you will see a certain, that's the next conference of the party, you will see a certain, you'll see stalemate that's going on, but it will be a political process, there will be progress, and there will be this climate justice opening that the advisory opinion provides, which follows an advisory opinion also by the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea. Sorry, thank you for being so long.
Thank you so much, Professor Tony. You've certainly given a lot of interesting examples about how Filipinos have helped shape the current framework for climate justice and sustainable development as a whole. So that ties in very closely with Mohammed's sphere of expertise. And I'd like to ask you, I think many of us are familiar with all the overlapping challenges that we're facing, all the crisis in financing. We had just come from, of course, FFD4, tackling all of these issues around financing for development. But at this point, do you see any opportunities amidst all of these challenges? Are there any innovative financing mechanisms that could support financing for development in middle-income countries like the Philippines?
Thank you, Maureen, for the question. But then also, before I start, let me also thank you for DFA for the opportunity, and then also bringing together all the stakeholders. Really good to see, in particular, the students in the room. Before I start, I think you mentioned the FFD, which was a really important dialogue which happened in July in Spain. One of the things that came from FFD was that the financing for development, the gap has been increasing, and we now anticipate that for developing countries to cover financing for SDGs, we need $4 trillion per annum until 2030. But ironically, one of the data points that also came from a report that was presented in the forum was that there is actually $450 trillion worth of global wealth accumulated in financial systems, capital markets throughout the world. So the world has not probably seen a wealthier time. So the money is there. If you account $450 trillion and then versus the $4 trillion of SDG financing gaps, you probably need less than 1% of this money. So it really is a matter of our priorities and the way that we think about our allocation decisions. So that's one thing. The Philippines is probably in the final stretch of reaching an upper middle income country, probably next year. This year, the country missed the threshold because of a $26 shortage, when you calculate the GNI per capita. So of course, you see as countries move towards reaching upper middle income status, typically that reduces the ODA flows that flows into the country. We are also in a time where that even without accounting for that, the global ODA flows are declining. But keeping this dynamic in mind, I think in two areas there can be opportunities. On the private side, private markets, and on the public side. In terms of the private sector, I think many countries, including in the FFD, also mentioned the role of, for example, blended finance, which is a very simple idea of mixing, using concessional financing to crowd in private financing. But I also remember that the same theme came up 10 years ago when there was an FFD in Ethiopia where blended finance was oversold, as this solution which will bring in, from billions to trillions of dollars. Blended finance is not a panacea. It needs concrete steps and design to make sure that the money is matched with proper, project flows. The kind of financing that you probably will require for a renewable wind farm in somewhere in Asia, the kind of financing that you require for that will be completely different from, for example, what is required for, let's say, R&D, which support resilient crops, which will benefit smallholder farmers somewhere in Asia, where you can probably make use of grants, for example. So the idea is to look at sector by sector, geography by geography, and then making sure you have a concrete plan which matches available financing to where that's best needed. I think a blended finance roadmap which looks at sector by sector, geography by geography could help. Now let me say something about the public side as well. We know that here in the Philippines, a lot of good progress has also been made towards having sustainable finance. For example, the DOF has already issued $7 billion worth of sustainable long-term bonds already in several currencies. And the world, the financial markets are shifting from a traditional risk-return model towards a more 3D dimensional. You look at risk, you look at returns, and then also you look at the development impact. So this is where the world is shifting. And in that sense, Philippines has made good gains because already $7 billion worth of bonds have been issued this way, and the use of proceeds, how the money is being used, is also being reported. So from a governance perspective, there is a good change. Where we need perhaps a bit more work is how can we then translate some of these national gains into subnational levels also, where we have a lot of LGUs in the Philippines, and the data shows that, for example, there are $3.5 billion worth of LGU lending which is already happening between banks in the Philippines. So if there's a way to somehow translate that through a sustainable framework where LGUs also report how they borrow and then what projects that they are using it for, that will be a really good step in terms of governance because it enhances the transparency. My last point, many countries have also tried diaspora bonds and acknowledging there are a lot of millions of Filipinos outside the country, and this is also a sector which brings in, I think, $38 billion, 9.5% of national GDP. Countries like India, for example, have used the opportunity to issue diaspora bonds so that Filipinos can also, finance their own country's development. Some countries have tried to tie it with social protection systems, because when you are overseas, it's the case that you don't always have social protection in those countries. So this is also a way for the diaspora to also save for their social protection also. That's probably, I will probably pause.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. You raised a lot of interesting points, especially in sustainable finance, and I hope to come back to that later. But also, I think with all the discussions around financing for development, climate justice, the question of innovation and leveraging technology is becoming more and more critical for our country. So with our current profile, I would like to ask Yusek Lea, how would the Philippines best develop its potential as a regional hub? How do we engage in the current challenges of AI and innovation and the potential of science to contribute more sustainably to our development and towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals in the next few years?
Thank you very much for that question. I think science is in our constitution and it drives progress. So this UN Day reminds me of the power of collective action and at the same time shared responsibility. It means it's not only DOST because it's science and technology, but it's the whole of nation. Everybody has its own responsibility. In the ever-changing world, the challenge is now not only through diplomatic nor trade. Cooperation is not only measured now by diplomacy nor trade. It's now even measured by digital solidarity and technological partnership. So everybody is now into AI. Everybody is now into the digital world, especially the young people. For those who are not so young, we are coping for this kind of technological advances. So which means cooperation already evolved. And we should raise our bars in order for us to be part of that global race. However, we will not be into like generating AI programs, etc. For us, I think it's more of how we will apply the tools of AI rather than generating high-end AI. Let the first world countries do that. They have all the money behind that. We can use their technologies, apply it to us. And this is where the power of collaboration comes in. And of course, DFA has been very instrumental in these kinds of diplomatic collaboration. So I think in the future, we see ourselves as an innovation hub on particularly application of more of the collaboration that we have with different partners and a hub on innovation which mirrors also the science, technology, innovation, which SDG gives us, where it is more inclusive and it is more practical. So we do not have all the funds in the world. So I think the application part and the practicality of applying the innovation is more towards that innovation applicability.
Thank you so much. Sounds very interesting and challenging. I think the future that you're already describing is actually already here. We're already seeing AI literacy as coming up as a key skill in many jobs. So I'd just like to circle back to Professor Tony, based on the very rich insights that you had earlier. I think we're seeing, a very close intersection between human rights issues and the question of climate justice. Yes. So with all of the negotiations going on now and the Philippines being a leading voice in that, where do you see the opportunities and convergences leading us over the next few years? The questions of just transition and other related topics.
Thank you. That's a really good question. And I just want to say how proud I am of the leadership of the Philippines, and especially the DFA, on pushing the human rights agenda within the UNFCCC, and especially the Paris Agreement. I was a witness to that and a participant to that because I was also one of the lead negotiators of the Philippines from 2009 to 2015 when the Paris Agreement was adopted. And we were one of the first countries to push the idea that climate change or human rights cannot be separated from climate change. That has been already a trend within the Human Rights Council, and we were always pushing that in Geneva. But it took a while in the Climate Convention to get it. You won't see it in the new UNFCCC at all. But for those of us who were there from the beginning, it was such a clear link, right? I mean, when you talk about impacts, you have to talk about human rights, impacts both of climate, but also the impacts of climate mitigation, and especially when we began talking about forestry and land and agriculture, you're talking about the rights of people, the rights of the poor, the rights of vulnerable communities. So that became very clear to us after, as I said, Typhoon Haiyan, or Yolanda in the Philippines in 2013, that you could not separate the climate agenda from the human rights agenda. And we started pushing that idea. And finally, in 2014, in Lima, it was groundbreaking. The Philippines started pushing that idea of a human rights agenda within the climate, supported by Chile, other countries, such that by the first meeting of the working group that would eventually lead to the Paris Agreement in Geneva in February 2015, we already had a human rights caucus within the climate convention. And by the time the Paris Agreement, very clear proposals for text that finally found its way through the loss and damage agreement, but also very important in the preamble of the Paris Agreement. I very lucky to have been chosen to chair the subsection of the preamble that led to language like climate justice, human rights, etc., etc. And we got that. And I would say that the foreign service officers that were assigned to us during that time, Donna Gatmaitan and others, were very critical so that we would be able to achieve that. And that got adopted in the Paris Agreement. So moving forward, because it's a question that you asked, moving forward, what we should be doing here. Loss and damage has already taken off, and that's now a question of getting the money and getting the programs in place. Just transition is the big issue in the agenda in Belém. I think they will be able to find a conclusion on just transition, which is how do we transition from a high emissions economy to a low emissions economy, and with the help of our partners. I think we'd be able to arrive at that agreement. The Philippines, I think, will be in the forefront. I certainly know that Secretary Lutilla, I don't know if he's decided to go or not, but whether he goes or not, the delegation will be pushing that. Outside, I'm not going, but I have a 10-person team that's going actually from Manila Observatory to push from the outside the conclusion of a just transition agenda that will then typically will have a work program, and I think we have to be able to, we should participate in pushing that work program together. Having said that, there are various parts in the preamble of the Paris Agreement that has not yet, found life operationally. It's there as a principle, but I can see, specific vulnerable sectors, women, for example, children, people with disabilities, indigenous peoples. That's now a very big agenda, where we can also excel. And I know the new leadership in the National Commission Indigenous Peoples are willing to do that. So there's a lot of space for us to push and to continue to excel in the climate process. In addition to what I said earlier, which is that outside the climate negotiating process, there's now appetite to push accountability to various legal mechanisms. So I'm very hopeful. I mean, I'm semi-retired in that I don't negotiate anymore. I can't do all-nighters anymore. I remember my last night in Paris negotiating the preamble, and I really told myself, this is the last night ever. I will not sleep for health reasons and other reasons. But I do train a lot of people. I continue to train, continue to teach undergrad, masters, doctoral levels to get new actors. And then we're very lucky in the Philippines because we have a whole community of practice that have people like me, very senior level. Lots of ambassadors now went through, worked with them, Ambassador Laila. Laura Santos was in UNIO when we negotiated the Cartagena, the Copenhagen Accord, Ambassador Leo Herrera Lim. Of course, I wanted to go back to Copenhagen because that ended badly, and I want to enjoy Copenhagen again. But we have this really incredible human resource in various departments, from the DFA, the DOST, PAG-ASA, also in the University of the Philippines. The Department of Agriculture is now, able to work on climate and agriculture. So that's the future for us, I think, and it's a good one.
Thank you. So clearly, the responsible climate stewardship will continue to be interlinked with advancing the human rights agenda, and that's the way forward for us, the challenge for the Philippines as a global leader. I'd like to ask Mohammed, because you raised some of the key action areas that came out of the fourth conference on financing for sustainable development recently in Sevilla, and you also brought up, the unique character of the Philippines, not only as an emerging middle-income country, but also as having a significant diaspora with a very active voice in the international community. How would you tie in some of those thematics around reforming the international financial infrastructure and exploring innovative mechanisms for development with those specific characteristics that make the Philippines such a strong voice in the global community on these issues? What would be the way forward for us in terms of those action points from FFD4?
Thank you. I think when the FFD outcome document was produced and when the side events and exchanges were happening, a couple of interesting trends and insights came out. One of the things was that I think some announcements were made on, for example, IFIs in the UN system also working together on, for example, the clearance of projects and project approvals. I think some of the announcements were quite welcome, where when one IFI approves a project, it automatically recognizes the same approval process, so the projects can sort of start from there. But perhaps one of the things which was quite prominent and looked specifically by economists and finance professionals were also that credit rating agencies and the reform that is required for credit rating agencies was also on the agenda, which is not something which has happened in the past. And that is interesting for a number of reasons. Global credit rating agencies determine to a large extent the cost of borrowing for a country. And we saw that during the COVID, a number of developing countries were downgraded in the middle of COVID, raising their costs of borrowing and then leaving them in a very tight place where they they were essentially locked out of international financial markets, so they couldn't borrow for any recovery reasons, and that made life very hard in many parts of the world. There were some suggestions and signs of changing attitude towards credit rating, which I think has some significance here in the Philippines as well. UN system, including UNDP and UNCTAD, has for a number of years pushed for credit rating agencies to recognize hurricane clauses, for example, when countries go on to borrow from the markets. They can sort of push for these clauses to be in their borrowing agreements, so that when a disaster strikes, they're actually able to pause some of the debt payments and then focus on recovery and humanitarian efforts in the country. One of the lessons learned from COVID was that did not happen, where some countries, while they were locked out of international markets, were actually forced to make debt payments. And that was a very difficult position. And what is quite encouraging to see is that the changing attitudes of credit rating agencies. 3 countries so far has sort of issued these innovative financing instruments. Grenada, Barbados, there was one other country which has issued these borrowing, new type of borrowing payments. And Grenada last year became the first country to actually invoke their hurricane clause when Hurricane Beryl struck them. They were able to actually pause their debt payments and then focus on recovery. I think it will be an interesting area for countries which are particularly hit by disasters to sort of look at, because the attitudes of rating agencies are also changing, and in the specific case of Grenada, credit rating agencies actually recognize that they will not treat those sort of debt deferrals as default. So that is good news. The second point I would also probably mention is, and Dr. Leah also already outlined this, on AI and how to finance for that. There is a huge rivalry going on, and a lot of thinking is happening on how countries should be financing AI and what are the things that they need to be mindful about. This was to some extent covered in FFD also, but it will come out in the future. One of the things is that AI is also very energy intensive. It's also very water intensive. So we are finding, in several countries, and fully mindful of the fact that in this part of the world, many countries are positioning itself to receive foreign direct investments to build data centers. And the thing that I think we have to be careful is that because they are very energy intensive and because they are very water intensive, if proper design systems are not put in place, that could put countries in a position where they drain a huge amount of energy from national power grids, and then also can cause some water stress. In Singapore, you saw that there was a moratorium placed on new AI development. And last year in Ireland, 14% of all power actually came for powering these data centers, causing some strain there as well. So these are, I think, some of the things that we perhaps need to think about.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. I think if I'm going to pick up on the thread that ties together all of your inputs, it seems that the key challenge is really not only effective economic management, but more broadly good governance through accountability and safeguards as the critical way to ensure that financing for development can be sustainably managed going forward. Yusek Buendia, I'm actually a fan of your Balik Scientist program. I had the honor of having you present at a consultation workshop on diaspora engagement that IOM organized earlier this year. Would you like to share some of the ongoing national and global level initiatives that DOST has in terms of engaging with the science and innovation sector and leveraging this towards achieving the SDGs in the next few years for the Philippines?
Thank you very much. I think Brain Gain initiative of the Department of Science and Technology, which started as early as 1975, but it was only put into law in 2018. So having it as a law gave us more teeth, more incentives to attract and engage more Filipino scientists outside of the Philippines, residing in outside of the Philippines, to come back and help in the development of the country. There are already about 900 engagements since 1975, but it has boomed since 2018 after the passing of the law. And what these scientists do is to help us in all aspects of science, technology, and innovation, from energy to agriculture to nanotechnology to AI to name it, we have it. The thing is, we want them to come back for good. There has been people coming back for good, although not the more mature one. Also, people who are in their prime have resided for good in the Philippines. We do not actually, we cannot leverage on what they receive outside, but we tap their patriotism. So that is why our mantra is balik, meaning to come back. Balik puso, puso meaning the heart. Balik Pilipinas, meaning come back to the Philippines. And balik scientist, you come back as a scientist. So giving them this mantra, we are enticing them for their patriotism to come back and help the Filipinos. And most of them, I think maybe there are already about 100 of them coming back for good, helping the different state colleges and universities, other local government units, even the private sector, to whom they are engaged, to develop research capabilities and even develop solutions for typical problems like traffic. So I think this is one of the very good programs that help our scientists give back to the Philippines, at the same time develop programs that, and also mentor other scientists, which, if not for them, will not be able to have this mentorship program. And likewise, we also tap on their networks, because they have been in other countries, they have their own networks, they have their own science, well, they can actually link our state colleges and universities, our local government units with their networks abroad. So I think this is one of the programs that we leverage on when it comes to science, technology, and innovation. And for me, it's one of the success programs.
Thank you, Yusek. Indeed, I hope that more scientists from the Filipino diaspora would be inspired to engage in that. We have all these talented and eager young minds who would benefit from that mentoring. So just to wrap up this very exciting discussion, I'd like to ask each of you just to share, maybe in 2 minutes, going forward, how would the UN and all our other partners from civil society, the private sector, the academe, and of course our diplomatic corps from the DFA engage in all of the challenges and maximize all the opportunities that you mentioned? What would be the key points, the key priorities for the Philippines as a co-architect of multilateralism in the next few years? Professor Tony?
I'd like to answer that by sharing a story about change that, the only, it's a cliche, but it's true. The only thing that we're sure of is that there will be change. And right now, the UN is actually in the middle of of change, right? I mean, and one can be depressed about it, but I prefer to be forward-looking and, hoping and seeing how the UN will look like 10 years from now. So I'd like to share stories of 20 years apart. When I was negotiating the Kyoto Protocol, I was the lead negotiator in the Philippines. I was Undersecretary of Environment. Then in 1997, I was very young, very energetic. I could not sleep for 10 days if I had to. And in Kyoto, which was a real negotiation, people actually negotiating texts. In the last 12 hours of the negotiation, I did not sleep, and I was there to pursue the Philippine interest and the G77 interests. Plenary, the Committee of the Whole, started negotiating at like 10 in the evening. And at 4 in the morning, we kind of were sure, we're just a few texts away from adopting the Kyoto Protocol. We adjourned sine die, so we would end the negotiation December 10, but it's actually December 11 already. And then at 4 in the morning, someone asked me to go to another room, a small room, took me out of the plenary to meet with my counterparts from oil-producing countries who were very concerned about the income, the agreement that was about to be adopted. And quite frankly, without mentioning which country, one of my, in fact, higher than me at ministerial level, threatened us, Philippines. Why are you doing this? You have a few million Filipinos in our countries, right? And this could destroy our economy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Thankfully, I had written instructions from Fidel V. Ramos, which I also wrote and adopted, that this is going to be our position in the negotiation. So I said I have no choice. I have a written instruction from my president on how to do this. 20 years later, in the Paris Agreement in 2015, again I negotiated for the Philippines, this time on the 1.5, 2 degree target. And I was requested by the same country to do a bilateral on this particular issue. This was in the Paris, the Le Bourget, the hangar, airport hangar, and they had a tent, beautiful tent for their delegation, and I was asked to come in. And to my surprise, the colleagues, from that country said, we're very happy to accept 1.5 as part of the text of the Paris Agreement. At the time, it was aspirational. But I knew it was okay because I knew that once the science would became clear in 2018, the 1.5 aspirational target would become the legal target. And everyone talks now. Nobody talks about the 2 degree target. Everyone is now talking about the 1.5 target, as difficult as it is to do. So change happens in multilateral processes as long as you keep on talking. So this is not necessarily a good moment for multilateral processes. Although there was the agreement on the BBNJ and biodiversity is a really good example of a multilateral process because it was a negotiated agreement, as compared, for example, the plastics agreement that has not yet been adopted because of, I think, more than anything, failure in the negotiating process, which I think can eventually be remedied because we do need a plastics agreement. So multilateralism is alive, and the Philippines can actually play a role. And for you guys who will hopefully be diplomats, it's very difficult FSO exam, so you will have to really study for that. The future is very bright for this field, and you can make a difference.
Thank you so much. Mohammed, your concluding thoughts?
Thank you. I'll be brief also in the interest of time, but financing for development is a galvanizing effort. Everybody has a role to play. And I would like to go back to where I started, where there's $450 trillion globally in various financial systems out there. And it's just a matter of us figuring out our priorities and driving system transformation out of this. Financing do not always comes in the form of hard physical cash. Providing policy stability is also a form of de-risking. And this is where a lot of governments, subnational governments also can provide that kind of policy stability so that private investments can be de-risked also. And I think the role of private sector is very important. There will be no amount of public financing which will ever be enough. It will always be the case that private sector has the money to finance something on a long-term basis. So when there's an opportunity, to make a difference, and I earlier alluded that the financial systems are changing from a risk-return perspective to a mechanism where impact is becoming much more prevalent. So the private sector has a big role to play. And then, of course, not in that we have our academia, our students, civil society. They are such an important part of financing too, because they are really the best means to drive transparency in how public financing is used, private financing is also used. So we sort of all have our roles to play, and that is the way I think we can galvanize financing for development.
Thank you so much. Let's have a big hand as well for Mohammed. And of course, I'd like to invite Yusek Leia, your parting thoughts.
Thank you very much. I think science, technology, and innovation is the greatest equalizer. Everybody has their own unique ingenuity. Everybody can create something. But I think in creating, we always have to have the goal that we create for the greater good. And I think science, technology is not static, it's dynamic. And therefore, the technologies that we develop today may not be the technologies that will solve our problems 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. But there will always be people who can think, who can feel, and who can be on the ground, knowing what the people need. It's not even AI. AI is just a tool. AI should work for us, and we should not work for AI. So I think we still need a lot of young people to generate knowledge, to start the science, technology, and innovation ecosystem, and make these emerging technologies work for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So a round of applause for all of the inspiring and insightful discussion from our speakers. And now we also have some reactions from our student guests. May I first invite Ms. Aliyah Star from Cavite State University, our first reactor.
Thank you so much for that wonderful discussion. It was nothing short of insightful and educational. Now, I really like the points that was brought up in this discussion. Mr. Lavinia's point about how we can't separate human rights from climate change. Because just like how we can't separate good health and well-being with climate action, because our health is heavily or strongly affected by our environment, and our environment is affected by our climate, and vice versa. So we can't totally separate those because it is factors that affects one another. And Mr. Mohammed's point about how we should allocate our funds depending on the need and geography in order to maximize our financial capability. And of course, Undersec's
Undersecretary Bendia's point about how we can utilize AI, technology, and science by using it responsibly for the betterment of not only our society, but also facilitate the things that we are currently advocating and fighting for. Now, I have a follow-up question. Knowing the fact that we know the gaps that we need to fill, the things that we need to do, and the platform that we can put our advocacy on, how can we ensure that our advocacies, ideas, concepts, and resolution can actually produce tangible effects that goes beyond just documents and can actually that people, even ordinary people, can actually experience?
Thank you. So perhaps we'll have the two reactors first and then some responses from the floor. So thank you for that, Ms. Aliyah. I'd like to invite the second reactor, Mr. Carl David Andaya from the Model Sangguniang Kabataan Network.
Hello po, good morning. So I would just like to thank the panelists for this wonderful discussion. So listening this insightful discussion, I am deeply inspired by how the intersection of human rights and climate change, climate justice was not only highlighted, but also rooted in the Philippines' leadership in international negotiations. It shows that our country has always carried a moral voice, one that fights for dignity, for fairness, and survival in the face of the climate crisis. When we talk about earlier about loss and damage, just transition and financing for development, we are not just discussing global economic systems. We are also talking about the daily realities of communities like ours, where climate change affects livelihoods, education, and even mental health. What gives me hope is that the Philippines continues to play a strong role in linking rights, climate, and governance. And the same link, I believe, must also exist in our local youth leaderships. As a youth leader and part of Model SK, we see that good governance, accountability, and transparency are not just abstract concepts. They are urgent practices that must start even in the smallest unit of government. Through our policies that we are championing, which is the Youth Code, we pass and continue to champion. We aim to institutionalize participation, inclusivity, and ethical governance among the youth. We also advocate for the Freedom of Information Bill, which shares the same spirit as global transparency reforms discussed today. FOI empowers citizens to access data, question systems, and ensure accountability. The same principles now being echoed in financing for development. And through the Magna Carta for Young Farmers, we are grounding these values in sustainability and justice, ensuring that the next generation of Filipinos, especially in the agricultural sector, have not only a voice but also protection in the era of climate change. But I believe that for all these advocacies to take root, we must also look inward to our youth or the Katipunan ng Kabataan members in our barangay, in the lower level of our communities, and the SK institution themselves. Civic empowerment among the KK and continuous capacity building for SK officials are essential. That's why Model SK conducts orientations and webinars nationwide to teach young leaders how to manage funds, practice ethical procurement, and institutionalize transparency. Because when we strengthen the governance capacity of our SKs, we're actually preparing the next generation of reforms, youth who understand both the policy and the purpose behind every decision. And if I may add, the themes we heard today are very close to our work on the ground in our barangay. The reforms you are pushing globally and nationally, transparency, accountability, and innovation, are the same reforms we are already trying to model locally. Sometimes change doesn't have to start at the top. If national institutions move slowly, we can begin the reform from below in our barangays through our SK, our barangay. Simple actions like publishing project reports, digitalization records, and implementing open governance policies already mirror the accountability reforms being discussed at the global stage. In fact, many members of Model SK are entering digitalization efforts, not for trend, but for transparency and accountability. We believe that technology should serve democracy, not replace it. And if every SK in the country champions this transparency, climate actions, and digital good governance, imagine the collective impact it could have on our nation. Because at the end of the day, reform is not just a policy, it's a practice. And as young leader, we are proof that good governance, climate action, and accountability can thrive even in the smallest unit of government. If the youth can lead these reforms from the barangay level, then the Philippines can truly lead by example, not just in negotiations, but in action, innovation, and integrity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adia and Carl. So may I invite briefly if you have any quick responses to the questions and the insights shared by our reactors. Anyone from our panel? Lisa Clay?
Maybe I'll start. For the first question, I think the Department of Science and Technology has this tagline, Agham na ramdam, meaning science should be felt. That is why we go down to the level of communities to share the results of science and technology. Only, I think the only opportunity that COVID brought us is that everybody knew that everything should be science-based. Every decision, everything, every evaluation of the vaccines, etc., should be science-based. And therefore, science was looked at as the solution to the problems on the ground. And therefore, we think that science should be felt on the ground. And this is through the communities, the cities, and the ordinary people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to also briefly say that finance is also a tool of governance, and the role of youth in transforming finance into a tool of governance is so important. The global movement for sustainable finance has its roots in youth, actually, because youth were demanding that first, how is their money spent? When they contribute, in terms of their taxes, when they contribute towards their pension schemes, they were demanding to know how their money was spent. This has happened, in the past and over the decades, that sort of forced people, large institutional investors, to sort of come up with financing instruments which let, the contributing youth to exactly deliver a way to find out that, how their money is sort of being used. And that is a big driver of the sustainable finance that you see globally. And I would encourage, the youth which are sitting, particularly out there, to question how the money is spent when you pay your taxes, when you contribute, towards other things, that the real activism sort of begins there.
When I started in this field in the 1990s, early 1990s, the motto or the slogan, the mantra was think global, act local. And that's still true today. And I actually want to recognize just our UN agency partners in the Philippines because that enabled us to act local, the support, the experience, UNDP, UNCHR, IOM, really, World Food Program, all the UN agencies that work on the Philippines on the ground has made it possible for us to act local and to bring the global. But the advantage of seniority. Started in my early 30s. Now I'm in my over 65, 66 years old now, 40 years in the field, is that we should also think local and act global and bring our experience in the local to the global. That's very, very important. And here, you young people are very important for that. We've been lucky in the Philippines that over the last 20 years, we've had climate youth delegates. Sometimes, many times in the delegation, depends on how friendly the DFA always friendly, but sometimes the other actors are not as friendly. To be quite honest, during the 30 years, we lost that. But right after, Secretary Yulo Isaga agreed to bring in again the climate youth delegates, and before that, we always had climate youth delegates. If not in the delegation, certainly always out of the delegation. And in climate, we use the term, the phrase from Hotel California, the song. You can check in anytime you want, but you can never check out. Because the climate is a ubiquitous thing, always gonna be a big issue, a big challenge for the Philippines and for the world. And so young people, you check in, but be warned, you'll never be able to check out for climate, in climate issues.
Thank you so much. And with that, we wrap up our panel discussion. Thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you for that very exciting and insightful discussion. Warm round of applause again for our panelists. And have a good morning, everyone. I hand over back to our DFA colleagues.
Thank you very much, Attorney De La Cruz. That has been our panel discussion. Our panelists have been Professor Lavinia, Mr. Shahud, Undersecretary Buendia, and our student reactors from the Cavite State University and the Sangguniang Kabataan, or SK Network. Ladies and gentlemen, to close our session for this morning, may I invite to the front the Assistant Secretary for the Office of United Nations and International Organizations of the DFA. She was former Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative to the Permanent Mission of the Philippines in Geneva, Switzerland. She will soon be assuming her role as the Philippines Ambassador to the Federal Republic of Germany. May I invite to the stage Assistant Secretary Maria Teresa T. Almujuela to share with us her key takeaways from the lecture and panel discussion this morning. Asek, thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Assistant Secretary, and thanks to all the speakers, the panelists. When we started planning the UN Day event, we were imagining the best way to mark the UN, actually. And the default is, of course, to have parties, cocktail reception, symbolic events. But my crew, my team, represented by the directors here, the Deputy Assistant Secretary, we thought we wanted a public conversation, a very refreshing take. We need to listen. We have been doing the UN and the fault of the UN sometimes, and we're guilty of it, as in diplomacy, is that we stick to the language. We have our own language. We become stuck to our formulas, to our own way of speaking. But I thought that today we have made a very good accomplishment of having a very refreshing, very honest, straightforward conversation on what UN means to the Philippines, and to communities. And I would like to thank our representatives from the youth, representing the young people of the Philippines, to be with us. They have been a part of the journey of the Philippines. They constitute at least a third, 20% of our population. We are a young population, and it's important for us to hear their voices. We are celebrating the 80 years of the UN. 80 is old, too many. But you will see in the discussion that we had today that the conversation about the UN, because it is a cradle of noble ideas, the highest aspirations of mankind, that discussions on the UN never gets old. And I appreciate, of course, the inspiration, the pledge made by Undersecretary Helen de la Vega about the continuing devotion of the Philippines to the Charter as a founding member, and that we are doing our advocacies globally on many levels, across many spaces, and that we will continue to do so. Of course, we heard from the resident coordinator, Arno Peral, how much the UN is that cradle of big ideas, indeed, an exchange for an international exchange, a meeting of different views and perspectives, a coming together of nations to converge on common visions for humanity. We had a very compelling lecture from our dear Professor Xiao Chua. He left because he has a class in De La Salle University. Very powerful lecture on the legacies of the Philippines, that even from the very beginning as a young nation, we were committing beyond our means, sending 7,000 troops to the Republic of Korea, one of the 16 countries that responded to the call for peacekeepers. That was our first peacekeeping mission. We've sent 50,000 after that, nearly 15,000 after that. Our humanitarian credentials, which continues. The President has spoken, for example, during the ministerial conference on the regional conference on Asia-Pacific disaster risk reduction last year, that we are now leading the conversation in the UN on an instrument for the protection of persons in the event of emergencies. And I think this is part of the conversations as the Philippines chairs this process, the 6th committee, which discusses international law and other questions of legal issues in the UN. We are presiding that this year on the special 80th milestone of the United Nations. It was noted that it's very important to democratize these conversations in the UN, and I hope our colleagues in the UN in the Philippines appreciated hearing about these views, these questions from our young people. These are real questions. And we want to make sure that our conversations are rooted in the community, their concerns and their visions. So this is a continuing story. Thank you very much to the students for bringing such refreshing insights, but also the very frank discussions that you have brought to the table. We're usually very diplomatic, but I'm glad that we were bold enough to have this kind of conversations, and I think you have made this conversation richer indeed. Of course, the panel discussion was another highlight of our conversation. We talked about the current and contemporary issues, very special to the Philippines. We do have important stakes in some of these key conversations, and we highlighted 3: climate change, and then financing for development, and of course, the role of science and technology. We were very, very honored to hear from Dr. Lavinia how much the Philippines has engaged very closely You know, it's flesh and blood engagement from the very beginning, as you can hear, the late hours and the many years he has spent as a negotiator, one of which was negotiating the preamble of Paris Agreement, among other important instruments across the space. I think he has spoken about how we should persist in our principled advocacy, our activism in the climate justice space. And we thank him and the many generation of Filipino activists and diplomats, including our very own Ambassador Ditas Mueller, who have boldly brought the views of developing countries and climate vulnerable countries in these discussions. I love it that he said with much confidence that we are ready for the next phase in this evolving conversation on climate justice. As he said, these conversations never end. We have a deep bench. Thank you very much for mentoring the next generation of global climate advocates. He mentioned that we do have expertise in the Philippine bureaucracy. We also have legal talent to take us to the new frontiers of climate advocacy, and also the deep engagement of our private sector researchers and scientists in this conversation. And he challenged the youth, of course, to bring your voice, make our conversations, make action global and thinking local and vice versa. And I think we do have, we were very inspired to learn about this very long arc of engagement of the Philippines in global climate discussions. He has given us assurance that once you engage with principle, things change, and you can even change the minds and mindsets and hearts of other partners who are not believers at the beginning of the conversation. The second topic was of course very relevant to the Philippines as we are transitioning into an upper middle income economy. We have new conditions to deal with in terms of accessing financing, global financing. But there are, according to Mr. Shahud, discussions looking after reforms in the global financial system. And we're talking about innovative system for financing, blended finance, that actually considers the trajectory of countries, vulnerability of countries, especially the small island developing states. And also there are new instruments, and he mentioned foremost examples of this among Pacific and Latin America and Caribbean states, and also some new instruments launched by the Department of Finance. So, and I think he made a very good point about involving the public, the local government actors in this conversation on transparency and global governance. The last part, of course, was a message about how we leverage science, technology, AI for the greater good. They don't exist on their own, AI. They are there to support the flourishing of communities, of humanity, and people are at the center of science and technology. I think what she pointed out at the very beginning of her remarks, Yusek Lea Buendia, of course, said that collaboration, which the UN has facilitated for so long, and we hope there will be more of this to benefit countries like the Philippines, that there will be more collaboration for innovation and using technology for the greater good. I think she made a very important pitch, especially as the Philippines has been recognized for its improving global framework. We are now number 50 in the Global Innovation Index. We just reached this threshold in September. as a final point, of course, there's been a lot of reference to Carlos P. Romulo, the diplomat who was part of, again, the landing of General MacArthur in Leyte. But more than that, somebody who stood not only for the Philippines, but for all nations, even the then colonized nations of the world during the negotiations of the UN Charter. The School of Diplomacy of the Foreign Service Institute is named after him. It's a Carlos P. Romulo School of Diplomacy, and all Philippine diplomats and trainees in the institute all have their period of training, cultivation in this institution. I think we are talking about a long arc of engagement for the Philippines, and he was one of the pioneers. But as pointed out by Professor Xiao Chua, the legacy of the Philippines, the brand of the Philippines as a globalist has always been there, even before the birth of the United Nations and after. Each of you was given, when you registered at the beginning, one of these envelopes with the commemorative stamps issued by the Philippine Postal Office to commemorate the 80th year anniversary of the UN, but we launched it during the signing in June 2025 this year, which marked the signing of the Charter. And the inspiration for this event, actually, and all the work we do as Philippine diplomats in the front line of Philippine diplomacy, particularly in the UN, is actually Carlos P. Romulo and his successors. One of his successors, I believe, is with us, Ambassador Libran Cabactulan. Sir, please rise. He was already cited by Undersecretary Helen at the beginning, and it is because Ambassador Cabactulan presided over the 10th review conference for the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and it was the last review conference that has resulted in an outcome document for this NPT review conference. The NPT has been there for 50 years, and as mentioned by the previous speakers, consensus is not very easy to achieve lately. But that document, which was shepherded and facilitated by Ambassador Cabactulan, still stands as the baseline, the foundation of all the work that we're doing to progress and to work on the further implementation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. This is the kind of leadership that the Philippines has shown in the UN space. And again, the title of our event is Hope and Endeavor. If I may, this is inspired by the quote made by General Carlos P. Romulo at the first plenary meeting of the UN General Assembly on October 29, 1946. And he said, "The Filipino stake in the United Nations is a stake of an identical destiny, of shared anxiety and hope and endeavor." And this, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, friends, colleagues, students, is the continuing story of the Philippines. It is a story that unfolds every day with partners as well as with the communities and the citizens of the Philippines that continue to inspire the Department of Foreign Affairs and all Philippine diplomats who face other countries in making sure that our vision for a united nations is alive and is flourishing in the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, that concludes the first part of our UNDA program. Before I let you go, I want to call attention to an exhibit that UN Philippines has lent us. It's called 80 Years of Impact. It shows in very succinct infographics. It's there at the hallway, just outside the hall where we will have our reception. It shows how the UN has made an impact in the lives of ordinary Filipinos over the 80 years of its existence. The first UN agency started operating in the Philippines as early as, I think, 1947. So please, everyone, if you can spare a minute later to look at that exhibit. It's called United Nations 80 Years of Impact. It's right outside the hall by that hallway over there. So on behalf of the Office of United Nations and international organizations of the Department of Foreign Affairs, I thank the speakers and all of you for your active participation in this morning's session. And now I have the honor, the distinct honor of inviting you to the more fun portion of today's proceedings. We shall proceed to the Hall C over there, for our UN Day reception, which will be highlighted and keynoted by the Secretary of Foreign Affairs. So please, everybody, let us vacate this hall and move over to Hall C. Thank you very much. Mabuhay po tayong lahat.
Kala ko sa'yo yun.